She was scorned for being infertile, abandoned by a husband who called her a dead branch, until a billionaire proved her worth to the world by risking everything to love her. But the moment that changed everything wasn't his public declaration of love, or the viral courtroom testimony where she faced her ex-husband and said shame thrives in the dark. It was the night Victor Hale walked into Alaric Stone's gala and said loud enough for cameras to catch every word, "You really don't tire of broken things, do you, Mr. Stone? I admire your charity. Not every man would take on a woman with Elena's limitations," turning a professional event into a public reckoning that would force Elena to choose between walking away to save Alaric's company from scandal or staying to fight the ex-husband who just leaked her complete medical records to the internet with the caption, "The Billionaire's Barren Mistress," which meant the real question wasn't whether Alaric Stone would prove Elena's worth despite her infertility. It was whether Elena could prove it to herself before the man who destroyed her once found a way to destroy her again, this time taking down the billionaire who'd made the fatal mistake of loving her. Hello, my precious family. You're my heart, my joy, and my biggest blessing. I love you so much. May heaven pour light and peace into your home. May joy never leave your side and love never leave your heart. You are chosen and covered in divine grace. Thank you for your unwavering support. Comment your country below. Let's reach amazing heights together. The board member's wife moved through the marble lobby of Alaric Stone Enterprises like Judgment in Chanel, her heels clicking a rhythm that made the receptionist straighten instinctively. Elena kept her posture perfect behind the curved desk, spine aligned, shoulders back, lipstick unsmudged, the way she'd learned to exist in rooms that wanted her invisible. The woman's eyes landed on her with that particular kind of pity wealthy people mistake for kindness. "Poor thing," she murmured to her companion, loud enough to be heard, soft enough to claim accident if confronted. That's her, the one whose husband left her because she couldn't give him a child. Elena's fingers stilled on the keyboard. 3 years since Victor had walked out. 3 years since the divorce papers cited fundamental incompatibility in legal language that meant your body failed us both. 3 years of rebuilding herself into someone who could sit in public spaces and pretend the air wasn't heavy with her sentence. The barren one. The city had given her that name. The clinic had confirmed it. Victor had weaponized it. A dead branch on the family tree, he'd said the morning he left, as if her infertility was a personal affront to his legacy, as if love had always been contingent on ovulation schedules and embryo counts, and the things her body simply refused to produce. The elevator chimed. Conversations in the lobby died mid-sentence. That particular hush that meant Alaric Stone had entered the building. He stepped into the light like a secret the architecture had been keeping. Steel gray suit fitted with the precision of someone who understood that presentation was armor. Blue-gray eyes that cataloged everything while revealing nothing. Presence that didn't demand attention so much as simply take it as natural right. Rumor said he'd built his billion-dollar empire from the wreckage of a car crash that killed his parents and nearly killed him. That he'd turned trauma into towers, grief into glass, and steel monuments to control. Power, discipline, distance, that was Alaric Stone. His gaze swept the lobby, assessing, measuring, and stopped on Elena. Stayed there. For 3 seconds that felt like exposure. Like being seen instead of looked past. Like the moment before lightning strikes when the air changes pressure. She kept her expression neutral, professional, the mask she'd perfected. He approached the desk and the lobby's background noise seemed to lower in deference. "Your name," he said. Not a question, an acknowledgement that he didn't know it, which meant he wanted to. "Elena Ruiz, Mr. Stone." Her voice came out steady. Small victory. "How long have you worked here, Ms. Ruiz?" 18 months. "And in 18 months, how many times have I walked through this lobby?" She understood the test. "Approximately 147 times, sir. You typically arrive at 7:15 a.m., leave for lunch meetings at 12:30, return at 2 o'clock, and exit between 8 and 9 p.m. depending on overseas calls." Something flickered in his expression, not quite surprise, more like recognition of a skill he hadn't expected to find at the reception desk. "You pay attention. It's part of the job. Most people don't." He tapped his fingers once against the marble counter, a gesture that seemed to contain a decision he was making in real time. I have an investor dinner tonight. My executive assistant is out with flu. I need someone who notices details, who won't flinch under pressure, who can read a room and adjust accordingly. His eyes held hers. Walk with me. It wasn't a request. Elena stood, aware of every gaze in the lobby tracking her movement, of the board member's wife whispering something sharp to her companion, of the security guard whose expression said, "Be careful." She followed Alaric Stone to the elevator, and the doors closed on the lobby's collective judgment. "You understand this will be scrutinized," he said as they rose past floors of his empire. "People here talk. They'll assume things." "They already assume things, Mr. Stone. At least this way I'll have earned the gossip." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but close. "The dinner is with European fund managers. They're considering a $200 million investment in our sustainable housing project. They're also sexist, skeptical, and easily bored. I need you to be forgettable enough that they underestimate you and sharp enough that when you speak, they listen." "Understood." "Why do you think I'm asking you instead of someone from the executive floor?" Elena met his eyes in the elevator's mirrored wall. "Because executives perform competence. I just have it. And because you suspect I'm used to being underestimated, which means I know how to use it." "Correct." The elevator opened. 7 p.m., Caruso's. "Don't change your appearance. You're perfect as you are," which will irritate them into revealing their biases early. He stepped out. The doors began to close. "Mr. Stone?" Elena's voice stopped them. "Why me, actually?" He turned, expression unreadable. "Because in 18 months you haven't asked me for anything. Not a promotion, not a favor, not even acknowledgement. That kind of self-sufficiency is rare. I'm curious if it's strategy or survival." The doors closed on his words, and Elena rode back down to the lobby where her phone was already lighting up with texts. The board member's wife had posted to her social media, "Guess who just got special attention from our CEO? Some women know how to use their limitations to get ahead." 23 comments within minutes, most using words like opportunist and desperate, in the particularly cutting, "Well, she can't trap him with a pregnancy at least." Elena powered off her screen, returned to her desk, straightened the pens that didn't need straightening, and let herself feel for just one moment the small, dangerous warmth of being noticed. Not for what she couldn't give, but for what she could. At 6:45 p.m., she stood in front of her apartment mirror, wearing the same blouse and skirt from work, the same subtle makeup, the same pearl studs her mother had given her. Don't change your appearance. She understood what he'd meant. Let them underestimate the receptionist, then prove them wrong with every word. The dinner was a performance. The European investors, 3 men in expensive suits who looked at her like she was decorative furniture, made assumptions out loud about her role, her background, her relationship to Alaric. She smiled blandly and said nothing, cataloging their tells: who checked his phone when nervous, who made eye contact when lying, who deferred to the oldest man before speaking. When the conversation hit an impasse over risk assessment, Elena leaned forward slightly. "If I may," the youngest investor actually interrupted her. "Darling, the men are discussing business." Alaric's expression went cold. "You were saying, Ms. Ruiz." Elena didn't flinch. "Your concern is that sustainable materials will inflate costs beyond market tolerance, but you're calculating based on current supply chains. Mr. Stone's proposal includes vertical integration. Owning the material production reduces per unit cost by 38% within 2 years, with long-term savings of 61%. The risk isn't in the materials, it's in the timeline, but that's manageable if you're willing to accept slower growth for long-term dominance." She paused. "My grandmother ran a market stall for 40 years. Tight margins, precise trust. She taught me that the best investments aren't the ones that return fast. They're the ones that return inevitably." The table went quiet. Then the oldest investor smiled, genuinely. "Your grandmother sounds smarter than most of the advisors I pay." "She was, sir." The deal warmed. Conversations thawed. By dessert, they were talking implementation timelines. In the car afterward, rain needling the windshield, Alaric said nothing until they reached her curb. Then, "Who taught you to read people like that?" Elena almost said, "Being read taught me to read back." Almost explained that when you're analyzed in clinic rooms and discussed in harsh light and ultimately discarded for failing to produce, you learn to study the people studying you. You learn to see the micro-expressions that reveal judgment before it's voiced. You learn to predict the moment someone decides you're not worth their time. Instead, she said simply, "Experience, Mr. Stone." He nodded as if she'd confirmed something. "Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m., I'm moving you to executive support on a trial basis. Your salary increases 30%. Your desk moves to the 42nd floor, and people will talk louder than they already are. If that's not acceptable, tell me now." Elena looked at the rain, at her reflection in the car window, at the apartment building where she'd rebuilt a life from wreckage. "It's acceptable." "Good." He waited until she'd exited before adding, "And Ms. Ruiz, you were right. They did underestimate you. That won't happen twice." The car pulled away. "Ya de and Elena stood in the rain long enough to feel it soak through her blazer, cold and clarifying. Upstairs, her phone glowed with a notification. Gossip site headline reading, "EO's new favorite. Receptionist with a past gets mysterious promotion." She powered it off, stared at the ceiling, and thought about the way Alaric Stone's eyes had stayed on her. Not with pity, not with expectation, but with something that felt dangerously like recognition. As if he saw not what she couldn't give, but what she'd already survived. As if survival itself was the qualification that mattered. And for the first time in 3 years, Elena let herself wonder if maybe, just maybe, being seen might not be the same thing as being judged. The whispers would follow. They always did. But tonight, for the first time since Victor had called her a dead branch, Elena Ruiz felt like she might be learning how to grow anyway. The week passed in whispers and stares. Elena's new desk on the 42nd floor sat outside Alaric's corner office, positioned where everyone entering had to acknowledge her presence. Executive assistants eyed her like a virus introduced to their sterile ecosystem. The coffee station conversations died when she approached. Someone left a photocopied fertility clinic brochure on her desk with a sticky note, "In case you need a reminder why you're really here." She threw it away without reading past the title, added "develop thicker skin" to her mental list of skills already mastered. On Thursday, Alaric's door opened at 6 p.m., the hour when most executives had left, but the ambitious remained, performing dedication. "Ms. Ruiz, conference room, now." In the glass-walled war room overlooking the city, 3 men in European-cut suits sat with the body language of people who'd already made a decision and were simply waiting for others to catch up. The lead investor, Christoph Vandermeer, according to the nameplate, had his arms crossed, expression carved from skepticism. "The fund is pulling out," Alaric said without preamble. "They're concerned about timeline overruns and material sourcing. We have 1 hour to change their minds or lose 200 million in committed capital." Elena's pulse quickened, but her face stayed composed. "What do you need from me?" "You remember details. I need someone the room won't expect." He gestured to the empty chair. "Sit, listen, and if you see an opening, take it." For 40 minutes, Elena watched Alaric present projections, timelines, contingency plans, all met with the polite disinterest of men who had heard better offers elsewhere. She cataloged their tells. Vandermeer checked his watch twice, a dismissal countdown. The younger analyst kept glancing at his phone, but the third man, silent, older, wearing a wedding ring worn smooth by decades, he watched Alaric with something that looked like regret, as if he wanted to believe but couldn't afford to. When Vandermeer began his exit speech, "We appreciate the presentation, but our risk tolerance doesn't align." Elena saw the older man's fingers tap once against the table. A tell. He disagreed but wouldn't contradict the leader. She leaned forward. "May I ask a question?" Vandermeer's expression said humor the assistant. "Of course, Vashwayanit. You're not concerned about the timeline. You're concerned about whether Mr. Stone understands the human cost of being wrong." Elena kept her voice even, conversational. because you've seen brilliant projections before and watched them collapse when the person behind them treated communities like chess pieces instead of people with mortgages and children. The older man's attention sharpened. Alaric went still. My grandmother, Elena continued, ran a market stall in a neighborhood where 3 grocery stores had failed. Everyone told her the margins were too tight, the customers too poor, the risk too high. But she understood something the grocery stores didn't, that trust has a compound interest more reliable than any stock. She learned every customer's name. She extended credit without contracts. She closed on the days that mattered to them, not the days that maximized profit. Vandermeer's arms uncrossed slightly. And did she succeed? She retired after 40 years with enough to send 3 grandchildren to college. Not because she made brilliant margins, because she made precise investments in the people those margins served. Small trust, accumulated daily, becomes institutional loyalty. Elena met the older man's eyes. Mr. Stone's housing project isn't about materials or timelines. It's about whether families in underserved communities finally get someone who sees them as people worth precise trust, not demographics worth quarterly returns. The silence stretched. Then the older man spoke for the first time. I grew up in social housing in Rotterdam. Pipes that froze, mold behind the walls. I swore if I ever had money, I'd fund something better. He looked at Alaric. But every developer I've backed treated affordable housing like charity with tax benefits. Built cheap, maintained poorly, congratulated themselves for doing the minimum. He posted, "Your assistant just described the model I've wanted to find for 30 years. Vandermeer studied Elena with new assessment. You're not just an assistant, are you? I'm someone who understands the difference between being poor and being treated as if poverty makes you disposable," Elena said quietly. Mr. Stone's model doesn't treat communities as disposable. That's why it will work when others have failed. The deal didn't close in that room, but it thawed. Contact information exchanged, follow-up meetings scheduled. The handshake Vandermeer gave Alaric lasted 3 seconds longer than professional courtesy required. In the hallway after they'd left, Alaric stopped. The floor had emptied. The city lights beyond the windows turned the glass into mirrors, reflecting them both. Who taught you to read people like that? Elena almost said it, almost explained that being read, examined in clinic rooms, assessed by doctors who spoke about her body like machinery that had failed quality control, analyzed by a husband who'd cataloged every failed ovulation test as evidence of her inadequacy, had taught her to read back. That when you're the subject of other people's measurements, you learn to measure them right back, to see the moment judgment forms, to predict the verdict before it's voiced. Instead, she said simply, "Experience, Mr. Stone." He studied her face as if trying to solve an equation. "That's the second time you've said that. Someday you're going to tell me what experience means." "Perhaps," Elena straightened the tablet she'd brought. "Will that be all?" "For tonight." But he didn't move, and neither did she, caught in one of those strange suspended moments where the professional boundary felt suddenly more like a fault line than a fence. Then his phone buzzed, emergency board call, and the moment fractured. "Good work, Miss Ruiz." "Thank you, Mr. Stone." By morning, the gossip sites had exploded. Mystery brunette at Stone's right hand. Who is Elena Ruiz? The article included old wedding photos someone had dug up, her and Victor, younger and stupidly hopeful. The caption, "From failed marriage to failed executive assistant." Sources say Stone's new right hand has a pattern of using men for advancement. The comments section was an ecosystem of cruelty. Someone had linked to her divorce records. Others speculated about plastic surgery, affairs, the precise sexual favors she must have performed to secure her position. At 10 a.m., Sharon from HR appeared at her desk. "A word?" In the sterile conference room, Sharon set down a folder with careful precision. "Ms. Ruiz, there have been concerns about optics. Your rapid advancement, your proximity to Mr. Stone, the media attention, it's creating an uncomfortable environment. We're suggesting a lateral reassignment, same salary, different floor, just to avoid any appearance of impropriety." Elena kept her hands flat on the table. "I see. And if I decline?" We'd hate to escalate this to a formal review of your conduct. My conduct has been impeccable. Perception matters as much as reality in corporate environments. Sharon's smile was sympathetic poison. I'm trying to help you. By demoting me for being competent while female? By protecting you from a narrative you can't control. The folder stayed closed between them. Elena wondered what documentation they'd fabricated, what witnesses they'd coached, how many ways they'd found to make her competence look like something that required punishment. I'll consider your generous offer, Elena said. May I see the formal recommendation in writing? Sharon's smile tightened. Of course. The email arrived at 11:30. By 11:45, it had been forwarded to Alaric. By noon, his response came, not to Sharon, but as a company-wide memo from the CEO. Effective immediately, any personnel recommendations regarding executive staff require direct CEO approval. Reassignments, demotions, or lateral moves suggested to avoid optics rather than address actual performance issues will be denied. Competence is not an appearance problem to be managed. It is a standard to be protected. We do not demote excellence to appease cruelty. A. Stone Sharon's retraction email arrived 10 minutes later. Elena read it twice, then closed her laptop and let herself feel the dangerous warmth of being defended. That evening, she stopped at a boutique that sold shoes she'd looked at for months. Navy heels with delicate straps, the kind that cost a week's groceries but made you walk differently. She bought them, wore them out of the store. The walk home was 8 blocks. She took every one. On the 3rd block, a teenager nudged her friend, stage whispering, "That's her, the one from the scandal. My mom says she's a gold digger." They laughed. Not cruel, just careless, the way young people are when they don't yet understand that their throwaway cruelty becomes someone else's weight. Elena kept walking, let the new heels carry her. On the 5th block, an older woman, 60-something, grocery bags in both hands, stopped, looked at her, squeezed her arm with surprising strength. "I know who you are," she said quietly. "I read the articles. I saw what they're saying." She paused. "You kept going. That matters more than they know." Lena's throat tightened. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just don't stop." On the 8th block, rain began. That soft, persistent rain that feels like the city crying. Elena looked at her expensive new shoes, felt the water beginning to soak through, and didn't run. She walked the last 2 blocks at the same steady pace, let the rain ruin the heels she couldn't afford, felt each step as a choice she was making. By the time she reached her building, she was soaked through, makeup running, hair plastered to her face. In the lobby mirror, she looked nothing like the polished receptionist who'd started this week. She looked like someone who'd survived something. Like someone still learning that survival could be a foundation, not just an endpoint. Upstairs, she set the ruined shoes by the door where they'd dry into expensive evidence. Made tea. Opened her laptop to find the gossip sites still screaming her name. And decided with the clarity that only comes after walking through rain you could have avoided, that she was done letting other people's measurements define her worth. Tomorrow, she'd walk into that office again. Let them whisper. Let them speculate. Let them write their cruel little articles about the barren woman who'd somehow convinced a billionaire she was valuable. She'd read their judgment. Then she'd prove them wrong by simply continuing to exist. Competently, persistently, unrepentantly. Because Elena Ruiz had discovered something the gossip sites didn't understand. When you've already survived the worst version of being seen, being noticed becomes less terrifying than staying invisible. The rain continued outside. Inside, she drank her tea and thought about her grandmother's market stall, about small margins and precise trust, about the difference between being needed and being valued, about the way Alaric Stone had looked at her in that hallway, not as if she was something to fix, but as if she was something already complete that the world had simply failed to notice. And for the first time since Victor had left her with a diagnosis instead of a marriage, Elena let herself consider the possibility that maybe being enough didn't require producing anything at all. Maybe being enough was just the act of continuing, despite evidence that suggested you shouldn't. She finished her tea, turned off her laptop, and slept better than she had in 3 years. The emergency board meeting was called for 8 a.m., which in corporate language meant crisis. Elena arrived at 7:45 to find the conference room already occupied by 12 board members arranged like a tribunal. Alaric sat at the head of the table, expression neutral, but she'd learned to read the tension in his shoulders, the kind that came before controlled demolitions. Miss Ruiz, Margaret Chen, board chair, smiled with her mouth only. How convenient. Please join us. Elena took the empty chair across from Alaric, aware that its placement was strategic, making her face him while they discussed her. We've been reviewing recent media coverage, Margaret continued, sliding a tablet across the table. Headlines glowed. Stone secretary, from divorce court to corner office. Below it, a photo of Elena and Alaric leaving the building together, her hand near his elbow in a gesture that could be read as professional or intimate, depending on what narrative you preferred. Social media engagement and these stories is significant, another board member added. Our shareholders are asking questions. Our competitors are implying impropriety. Ms. Ruiz's presence has become, he paused, selecting his words like weapons, a reputational hazard. Elena's hands stayed flat on the table. Professional, composed, the mask she'd perfected even as her pulse hammered against her throat. The solution is simple, Margaret said. Ms. Ruiz can be reassigned to a lateral position with full compensation. Same title, different floor, minimal proximity to the CEO. We protect her dignity while managing optics. That's twice in 1 week, Alaric said quietly, that this board has suggested I demote competence to appease gossip. I'm beginning to wonder if reputation management has become more important to you than actual performance. Alaric were trying to protect what? His voice stayed level but gained an edge that made the room temperature drop. Protect the company from having a talented employee? Protect my image by confirming I'm the kind of man who throws people away when they become inconvenient? He stood, and the board instinctively leaned back. Let me be clear. If integrity threatens my reputation, then reputation is worthless. If our shareholders can't distinguish between competence and scandal, then they're invested in the wrong company. That's not meeting adjourned. Alaric gathered his files with precise, controlled movements. Ms. Ruiz stays exactly where she is. If anyone wants to discuss this further, you can schedule time with my attorney. He walked out. The board sat in stunned silence. Elena stood carefully, maintaining her composure while feeling like she'd just witnessed someone set fire to a building from the inside. She found him 15 minutes later on the sky terrace, the glass-enclosed rooftop garden that served as his refuge from the empire he'd built. His fingers pressed against the windbreak, shoulders tight with tension he only released when no one was watching. Except now, she was watching. You didn't have to do that, Elena said softly. Yes, I did. He didn't turn. They were testing whether I'd sacrifice you to preserve their comfort. I needed them to understand the answer is no. It's going to cost you. Good. Now he turned and his face held something raw she'd never seen before. Exhaustion maybe, or the aftermath of adrenaline, or just the simple honesty of someone too tired to maintain the armor. Do you know what happened the night my parents died? The shift in topic was so sudden Elena took a moment to adjust. The car accident. I know the basic details. The basic details are sanitized. He moved to the glass railing, looking down at the city 42 stories below. I was 16. In the back seat, they were arguing about something stupid, whether to take the highway or surface streets. My mother wanted to stop for dinner. My father was late for a conference call. Stupid, ordinary things. His voice went flat, the way people's voices do when they're recounting trauma they've memorized. A drunk driver ran a red light. The car flipped 3 times. I woke up in a hospital 2 days later. They told me I was an orphan. Elena's chest tightened. Alaric. The year after that, I decided to become too busy to feel. If I was always working, always building, always moving forward, I didn't have to stop and acknowledge that I was alone. He turned to face her. I spent 15 years building an empire so I wouldn't have to build a life. And then you walked into that lobby looking like someone who understood that survival isn't the same as living. And I realized I'd been doing it wrong the entire time. Elena wanted to tell him her story, wanted to explain the clinic rooms with their fluorescent lights and cold examination tables. The doctor who delivered the diagnosis with clinical detachment, diminished ovarian reserve, poor egg quality, likelihood of natural conception less than 3%. Victor's face when he heard, not grief but calculation, as if he was already doing the math on whether she was worth keeping. The way he'd looked at her the morning he left and said, a dead branch on the family tree, as if infertility made her decorative timber instead of a person. But the words stuck in her throat, protected by 3 years of practiced silence. Thank you, she said instead, for telling me. He studied her face, seeing the deflection for what it was but not pushing. The Meridian merger, he said, switching back to business because that was safer territory for both of them. We're hosting a gala next month to finalize terms. I need you to coordinate guest flow. You notice the things people trip over. Of course. The guest list arrived 2 days later, 300 names, alphabetically arranged, each one representing power or money or influence. Elena scanned methodically, noting dietary restrictions and seating hierarchies and the invisible politics that governed who could sit near whom. And then, like a splinter buried in smooth wood, she found it. Hale Victor, CEO, Hale Properties. Her vision tunneled. The name on the screen became the name on divorce papers, became the voice that had cataloged her failures, became 3 years of accumulated damage compressed into 12 letters. She could tell Alaric, should tell him, but that would require explaining why Victor's presence mattered, which would require explaining the marriage, which would require admitting the infertility, which would require watching Alaric's expression shift from respect to pity. And she'd rather walk barefoot through fire than see pity replace the way he looked at her now. Instead, she studied the floor plan, mapped Victor's route from entrance to ballroom, calculated sight lines and traffic patterns, and built a choreography where past and present would never intersect. The gala arrived like a storm Elena had been tracking, but couldn't avoid. She wore black, simple, elegant, armor disguised as fashion, and stood in the ballroom's control center, managing the flow of 300 guests while cameras flashed and champagne flowed and money made promises in corners where contracts were really negotiated. She'd planned perfectly. Victor's route should have taken him nowhere near the main stage. But Victor, she'd forgotten, never followed plans that didn't serve him. She saw him first, crossing the ballroom with deliberate trajectory, smile sharp as calculation. He looked older, softer around the edges, success that had started to curdle, and he was moving directly toward where Alaric stood speaking with the Meridian executives. Elena's pulse spiked. She started moving, trying to intercept, but the crowd was thick and her heels were high and physics wasn't on her side. Victor reached Alaric first, extended his hand, said something too quiet for Elena to hear, but loud enough that the executives paused, intrigued by whatever energy had just entered their circle. Alaric's expression went carefully blank, the look he wore when processing a threat he hadn't anticipated. He shook Victor's hand with professional courtesy. Mr. Hale, I don't believe we've met. No, but I know your assistant. Victor's smile widened as Elena reached them, breathless. Elena and I are old friends, aren't we, darling? The word darling landed like a slap. Several nearby conversations paused. A camera swiveled toward them. Society photographer covering the event for the lifestyle section. We were married, Victor continued, loud enough now that the phrase carried. Before before certain complications made that arrangement untenable. Alaric's jaw tightened. Elena felt the room contract, felt the weight of attention and judgment, and Victor's calculated cruelty pressing down like atmosphere before a hurricane. You really don't tire of broken things, do you, Mr. Stone? Victor's voice carried perfect sympathy, perfect poison. I admire your charity. Not every man would take on a woman with Elena's limitations. The mic on a nearby camera caught every syllable. The crowd inhaled collectively, that unmistakable sound of scandal being born. Elena met Victor's eyes and saw the things she'd forgotten, that he didn't just leave her, he needed her to stay broken, so leaving felt justified. Her happiness threatened his narrative. Her success demanded he recalculate his choice. She didn't defend herself. Didn't explain, didn't give him the confrontation he wanted. She simply turned and walked away, head high, spine straight, moving through the crowd with the dignity of someone who'd survived worse than public humiliation and knew this too would pass if she didn't collapse under its weight. Behind her, she heard Alaric's voice, cold, final. This conversation is over. Security will show you out. Elena kept walking, through the ballroom, past the photographers, into the service corridor, where the gala's infrastructure was hidden from guest view. She found an empty room, closed the door, and finally let her hands shake. At midnight in her apartment, she typed the resignation email with clinical precision. Mr. Stone, given recent events and their impact on your company's reputation, I believe it's appropriate that I step down from my position, effective immediately. Thank you for the opportunity. Please consider this my formal notice. Elena Ruiz. Her finger hovered over send. At 12:03, someone knocked. She knew it was him before opening the door. Alaric stood in her hallway, hair rain-damp from the storm that had started during the drive over, still wearing his tuxedo but with the bow tie undone, looking like he'd left his own party mid-conversation and driven straight here. You're not broken, he said without preamble. You're the proof that the world's measuring stick is. Elena's throat closed. You don't have to. Yes, I do, because you're about to resign over something that isn't your fault. And I need you to understand that the only person tonight who showed any integrity was you, walking away instead of giving that man the scene he wanted. He stepped closer, not touching, just present. He called you broken because you survived leaving him. He can't tolerate that you became better in his absence than you ever were in his presence. Elena stared at him, this man who'd defended her twice in 1 week, who'd chosen her competence over his board's comfort, who'd just driven through a storm to stop her from disappearing. She pulled up the email, deleted the draft, let him hold her coat while she steadied herself against the doorframe. I won't be someone's liability, she said finally. You're not. You're someone's necessity. His voice was quiet, certain. And the difference matters more than you know. He left before she could argue, before the moment could become something neither was ready to name. But in the doorway, he paused. Tomorrow, 7 a.m., we face this together, not separately. The door closed. Elena stood in her apartment, coat in hand, and felt the dangerous warmth of being chosen spreading through her chest like a bruise that hurt and healed simultaneously. Outside, the rain continued. Inside, she decided she'd been walking through storms long enough. Maybe it was time to let someone walk beside her instead. They drew the line the morning after the gala, standing in his office while the city woke up below them. We don't date at work, Alaric said, and Elena agreed, and both of them knew they were lying to preserve a boundary they'd already begun to cross. Coffee became conversation. Conversation became the way his shoulders dropped when she entered a room, tension leaving his body like he'd been holding his breath until she arrived. Morning briefings stretched into afternoons. Professional distance became proximity measured in inches rather than feet. Close enough that she could smell his cologne, that clean, expensive scent that probably cost more than her monthly rent, but somehow felt less manufactured than honest. She learned he kept a pen from his father in his inner jacket pocket, silver and scratched and never used. If I use it, he admitted one evening while they worked late, eventually it'll run out. This way I keep him a little longer. He learned she slept with audiobooks on. Always fiction, always stories where people ended up whole. It drowns out the faraway sound of waiting room clocks, she said without meaning to, then tensed, waiting for the question that would require explanation. But Alaric just nodded. What kind of stories? The ones where being broken is temporary. They existed in that strange space between professional and personal, where every conversation felt weighted with things they weren't saying. He'd brush past her desk and his hand would graze her shoulder. Accident or intention, neither acknowledged it. She'd fix his tie before meetings, fingers lingering a half-second longer than necessary against his collar. The office noticed. Whispers multiplied, but they were careful, so careful, maintaining plausible deniability even as the space between them compressed into something neither could name, but both could feel. Then the dossier arrived. It landed on 3 major tabloid sites simultaneously, Coordinated, professional, paid for by someone who knew exactly how to weaponize private pain. Elena's complete medical history, scanned from clinic files with all the clinical language intact. Patient presents with diminished ovarian reserve. AMH levels indicate severely compromised fertility. Likelihood of natural conception, less than 3%. Recommendation: consider egg donation or adoption alternatives. The headlines bloomed poisonous by noon. The billionaire's barren mistress, Stone's secret shame, why his assistant can never give him an heir from divorce court to dead end. Elena Ruiz's fertility fraud. Her apartment buzzer became a weapon. Reporters camped outside. Her phone exploded with calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Journalists wanting quotes. Former colleagues offering poisonous sympathy. Strangers sending messages that range from cruel to crueler. One text from a blocked number. Now everyone knows you're defective. Does he still touch you the same? She read it twice, then packed a bag with hands that had learned steadiness from years of practice. Left her phone on the counter, powered off. Took the late bus to a coastal town she'd visited once as a child, when her family could still afford small vacations and her body hadn't yet become the thing that defined her. The town smelled like salt and second chances. She found a room above a gallery, paid cash for the month, and asked about work. The owner, a woman with paint-stained hands and kind eyes, needed someone to label inventory, manage the small gift shop, exist quietly in the background. For 3 weeks, Elena practiced invisibility. She woke with the gulls, walked the beach before the tourists arrived, labeled paintings with careful precision. Seascape number 47, oil on canvas, artist unknown. She learned the rhythm of tides in the particular silence that comes from being somewhere no one expects you, where your name means nothing and your history is blank. She told herself this was survival, that she was protecting Alaric from the scandal her body represented, that loving someone meant sometimes removing yourself from the equation so they could have the future they deserved. She told herself many lies that felt like kindness. On Monday of the 4th week, the gallery bell chimed at 10 a.m. Elena looked up from inventory to find Alaric standing between seascapes, hair disheveled from travel, eyes raw around the edges like he hadn't slept properly in weeks, still wearing his suit but rumpled in a way that meant he'd driven straight from the airport without stopping home. "You ran," he said, not an accusation, an observation. Elena's hands stilled on the painting she'd been labeling. "You should have let me. I looked everywhere." His voice carried exhaustion and relief in equal measure. "Your apartment, your mother's house, every hotel in the city. I finally called your old college roommate. She remembered you'd love this town. You shouldn't have come. I couldn't not come." He moved closer, careful not to touch, as if proximity might spook her into running again. "Elena, you disappeared. You left your phone, your life, everything because someone leaked medical records that should have been private. Because those records prove I can't give you what you'll want eventually." The words came out flat, practiced. "You deserve a future, Alaric. Children, family, the things successful men are supposed to have. I can't give you that. I already have a future." His voice trembled before his mouth did, control fracturing. "It looks like you walking beside me. It looks like coffee at 7 a.m. and the way you fix my tie before meetings and the sound of your voice reading contract clauses until my brain stops racing at 2 a.m. It looks like having one person in the world who sees me instead of what I've built." "That's not enough," but Elena's voice cracked, betraying her. "It's everything." He took one more step, close enough now that she could see the exhaustion carved into his face, the evidence of 3 weeks spent searching. "You think what you can't give me matters more than what you do. You think biology trumps choice. But I've spent 15 years building monuments to control, Elena. I chose steel over people, empire over connection, success over the possibility of being hurt. And then you walked into my lobby and I chose differently. I chose you, not what you can produce. You." Elena laughed once, sharp, broken. "You don't know what you're choosing." "Then tell me." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His hand found hers, fingers interlacing with the inevitability of things that should have happened sooner. "Tell me what I don't know. Tell me why you ran. Tell me what you're protecting me from. From settling. The words came out raw. From waking up in 5 years and resenting me for the children you don't have. From the moment you look at me and see limitation instead of love. That won't happen. You can't promise that. No, he agreed. But I can promise that whatever future we build it together. Not based on what we're supposed to want, but on what we actually need. He squeezed her hand. And what I need is you. Complicated, complete, exactly as you are. The sea wind rattled the gallery windows. Outside, waves crashed with the rhythm of inevitability. Inside, Elena let herself cry for the first time since the headlines broke. Not from shame, but from the dangerous relief of being found. Alaric pulled her close. Not kissing, not yet, just holding her while she shook apart and reformed in his arms. He pressed his face to her hair and whispered, "Don't run from me again. Whatever comes next, we face it together." She nodded against his chest, unable to speak, letting his heartbeat steady hers. They stayed that way until the gallery owner appeared, took one look at them, and quietly flipped the close sign. "Take all the time you need," she said, voice knowing. In the back room, surrounded by paintings waiting to be priced, Elena finally found her voice. "I was married for 5 years. When the doctor said I was infertile, my husband called me a dead branch. He left me on the same day we got the diagnosis." Alaric's arms tightened. His loss. He said I'd wasted his time, that he'd invested in a future I'd stolen from him. He was wrong. The headlines say he was right. "The headlines," Alaric said carefully, "can go to hell. And so can anyone who thinks your worth is measured in reproductive capacity." He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "Elena, I've built billion-dollar companies. I've negotiated with people who trade human lives like stock portfolios. I've won at every game capitalism invented. And none of it felt like winning until you walked into a conference room and taught European investors about your grandmother's market stall." She almost smiled. "That was a good pitch. That was you being exactly what you are. Brilliant, observant, kind in ways that don't require recognition. That's what I'm choosing. Not the possibility of children I've never wanted. Not some fantasy future where I conform to expectations I've spent my life rejecting. Just you. Is that enough?" Elena looked at this man who'd driven hours to find her, who'd defended her to his board twice, who stood in a small gallery above a coastal town and asked if choosing her was enough. "Yes," she whispered. "It's enough." He smiled, genuinely relief written across his face. "Good, because I have a hotel room down the street with terrible coffee and a view of the pier. We're staying 3 days. No phones, no press, no pressure. Just time to remember what it feels like to exist somewhere the world isn't watching. I have work. I bought the gallery." Elena blinked. "You what?" "This morning. Made the owner an offer she couldn't refuse, with the condition she keeps you employed as long as you want." His smile turned sheepish. "I thought you might need an exit strategy that didn't involve coming back to the city before you were ready. You bought an entire gallery so I could keep labeling paintings? I bought it because you looked happy here, and I've spent 3 weeks watching you be everywhere except happy. So yes, I bought the gallery. We can sell it later, or keep it, or turn it into a foundation satellite, whatever you want. The point is having options that aren't running or hiding." Elena stared at him, this careful, controlled man who'd apparently lost all sense of proportion, and felt laughter bubble up from somewhere deep. "You're insane." "Probably." He threaded his fingers through hers again. "But I'm insane about you, so it balances out." They stayed in the coastal town for 3 days, walked the beach at dawn, ate lobster rolls from the pier, talked about futures that didn't involve boards, or headlines, or other people's expectations. On the last morning, standing where the waves reached their furthest, Elena turned to him. "When we go back, it's going to be worse. The scrutiny, the gossip, the constant analysis of whether we're worth each other. I know. And you're sure you want this? Want me, despite the complications?" Alaric cupped her face with both hands, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "I've never been more sure of anything." He didn't kiss her. They both knew that crossing that final line required somewhere less public. less vulnerable. But the promise hung between them like a contract they'd both sign eventually. The sea kept their secret. The city would demand explanations. But for 3 days, they belonged only to each other. And that felt like the beginning of something neither had planned, but both desperately needed. When they returned, Elena moved back into her apartment. Alaric returned to his office. They maintained professional distance, 6 inches between them, careful not to touch where cameras might see. But everyone knew something had shifted. The way they moved in sync, the way conversations happened in glances, the way the space between them felt less like distance and more like anticipation. They'd crossed the line without touching, and neither planned to step back. When they returned, Elena moved back into her apartment. Alaric returned to his office. They maintained professional distance, 6 inches between them, careful not to touch where cameras might see. But everyone knew something had shifted. The way they moved in sync. The way conversations happened in glances. The way the space between them felt less like distance and more like anticipation. They'd crossed the line without touching, and neither planned to step back. For 2 weeks, it felt like maybe, just maybe, they'd survived the worst of it. The gossip sites moved on to newer scandals. The board grumbled, but held their votes. Elena worked beside Alaric in the careful dance of people who'd admitted feelings, but hadn't yet acted on them, building something fragile and hopeful from the ruins of everything they'd survived. Then, on a Tuesday morning, Elena's computer pinged with a new email notification. Subject, meeting request, merger exploration, from Hale Properties. Her hands went cold on the keyboard. The name at the bottom of the email, Victor Hale, CEO, stared back at her like a threat she'd been waiting for without knowing it. She forwarded it to Alaric with 2 words. He's coming. What Elena didn't know, what she couldn't know as she sat frozen at her desk while the city moved 42 stories below, was that Victor wasn't coming to make peace. He was coming to destroy everything she'd built, starting with the medical records he'd saved for 3 years, waiting for the perfect moment to weaponize her body against her one final time. The war they'd survived was just the prologue, the real battle, the one that would end with Elena standing in a courtroom saying, "Shame thrives in the dark," with Alaric declaring, "I love this woman," in front of 500 guests, with a billionaire choosing integrity over empire, and a woman proving her worth not despite her infertility, but because she'd learned that worth was never written in her womb. That battle was about to begin. But that story, that reckoning, that's part 2. Will Elena survive Victor's final act of cruelty? Will Alaric lose everything to protect the woman he loves? Will the courtroom testimony that goes viral be enough to prove that some truths are more powerful than shame? And will the miracle that comes 18 months later prove her worth? Or will Elena discover that she was always enough, with or without it? Find out in part 2, where the woman scorned for being infertile faces her greatest test yet, proving to herself what the billionaire already knows, that love isn't measured in what you can give, but in who you are when you choose to stand anyway. Part 2 coming next. Don't miss the courtroom battle, the public declaration, and the ending that proves worth was never about biology. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens when Elena stops running and starts fighting back.